Ludus Vulpes.
Welcome to Ludus Vulpes. My name's Kirsty.
And I'm Phil.
You join us as we run through the good, the bad and the ugly of Boonlake.
This one here. Boonlake is the latest Alexander Pfister game for all you Pfister fans out there.
From Capstone Games.
From Capstone Games, and is pitched as his expert level games. And we'll come on to why that's maybe not a good thing a little bit later on. So we thought we'd just take this opportunity to talk to you about this game and some of the challenges you'll face when you're learning this game, some of the challenges you'll face when you're playing this game, but also the possibility that this game might actually be very good.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, so without any further ado, let's just go through a quick summary of how the game works, so you can get an idea in your head of how the game is going to play. Down on the table, we've got the main board, and you've got your individual player boards. And the game splits into 4 scoring phases, which I think is probably the easiest way to summarise how the game works. And the scoring phases are dictated by the movement of your boat from these little harbours at the top of the board all the way down to these locks. And the first time round, you'll do an interim scoring here, you'll do an interim scoring here, which you go like this. And the second time round, you come straight down, interim scoring here and interim scoring here, then final scoring after that. So there is a final scoring after the interim scoring. So that's how the timing mechanism works in the game. And each interim scoring, you're going to do some scoring. You're also going to get the opportunity to gain some income, which are on these 2 tracks here. And you're going to be basing that on how far along these tracks you are, giving you either coins, cards or victory points, or both a lot of the time. So how do you progress through the game? Because as you can see, we've got this game is our end state of the last game we played of Boonlake, and we've got various pieces scattered across the board. So how are you going to get those pieces on the board? Because the board pretty much starts off empty when you start. There's a little stretch of tiles, and depending on whether it's a 2, 3 or 4 player game, that dictates how many tiles are already placed on the board at the start of the game. Over on here, you'll see the action board. Now, these action tiles start off distributed randomly and then flipped over. And the action tiles depict what you can do on your turn. So on your turn, you're going to pick one of those action tiles and you're going to proceed through the steps on that action tile. Now, most of the action tiles will leave the builder tile for a moment, have exactly the same anatomy. There is a play or discard a card piece, which is not an essential. You don't have to play or discard a card. Then there's the first action, and that action is your action alone. So there are various actions which might be putting one of these like workers onto the board. It could be putting these tiles onto the board. It could be upgrading these workers to little houses, all kinds of things. And then you move into the second part of the action step, which is an action that is shared by all the players at the table. So everyone then gets to do something. So every time you're picking an action, you're also picking an action for your opponents as well. And it's, go on Kirsty.
Bar 1.
Bar 1. Actually, I think it's bar 2, but
bar 1.
I can't remember. No, just bar 1. Because one action, the player who led the action cannot take the second part of the action. But actually, that's quite a powerful first action as well.
Yeah.
So, and you'll find this as a sort of recurring theme through the game, that you are sharing opportunity with the other players. So, for example, when you're upgrading one of these little houses to one of these settlements, you must have 3 presences scattered around you. But they don't have to be yours. They can be anyone's building cows or... I was going to say cowboys, but that's a different Alexander Pfister game.
Same meeple.
Same meeple. So you're going to share opportunity with everyone constantly throughout the game. Every time you take an action, someone else is going to benefit. Every time you put something on the board, there's an opportunity for somebody else to benefit. And that's constant throughout the game. It does mean that different player counts are going to play in very different ways. So I think that's quite an interesting concept sitting right there. So how are you going to score victory points? Everything you see with a cow skull is victory points. Everything you reveal on your board is going to get scored at interim and final interim scoring sections, so they're going to score you quite a few points. And then at the end of the game, you're going to score points just down here in this very small tile, just here. In this very small tile, teeny weeny tile. There's a little symbol here. We'll show you a photo of it on some of the cards, which is a sort of black bar with an arrow on it, and that indicates or denotes endgame scoring. So you're going to score points for the number of levers, which are these tokens that you've got on your player board, and that's variable depending on how many of those levers you've got. You're going to score points based on the cards. Every card you have has a points value at the bottom of it. I'll show you some photos of those. Some of those points values are variable because they're based on endgame scoring. And then finally, you're going to score points for everything you've taken off the bottom three rows here. And that's 2 points for everything on this row, 4 points for everything on this row, and 6 points for everything on that row. And thus, the game of Boonlake ends. So, we said we'd do the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yes.
Kirsty, what's your good? And then I'll do my good.
Okay. So, as with most Alexander Pfister games that I've played, we are big fans.
Absolutely.
We have many in our collection.
Great Western Trail sits in my top 5 games of all time.
Maracaibo. In fact, we picked up the Maracaibo expansion at Essen.
Also a fantastic game. We'll be doing a little video on the Maracaibo expansion at some point.
Yes, we will do.
Mombasa, I love, was one of the first games that introduced me to a really interesting shared player board. Anyway, carry on.
Okay. So I can see very much that there's a fantastic game here. Very much so. I think that there is a lot of iconography.
Good
there's
word.
a lot of there's a lot of action. Like, it's very different to have actions not being on cards or like an area where you go, this action takes a little bit of getting used to. I felt on the first go.
What I didn't explain about these actions is, depending on how high up the board they are, dictates how far you can move your boat. You always move about a minimum of 1, but you can, if you take the top 2 tiles, you'll move 4, up to 4 spaces along the river, really accelerating the game.
So, my good about this game is it encourages cooperative play in some areas. Semi-cooperative play. I can see that there's lots of different ways to score points. There's these bonus tiles along the bottom, which I'm not sure you've actually discussed yet.
I didn't explain those,
no,
but there's like 101 ways of scoring points in this game.
There's not a clear, obvious track.
No, well, there isn't. Well, there's this river.
I mean, as in to victory.
I know.
However, we have actually switched places, haven't we?
Yeah, we have.
Because we did we tried to do the videos the same, and I felt very much that this is, for me, it's not a bad thing. In the game Merv, there is the mosque track, and that if you fulfill that, you're onto a really good like not winning streak, but it gives you an ability, gives you a really good push. Yeah. And I actually played with the levers
from hell,
heavy on the levers, and that gave me a good 30-point boost. Yeah.
Like, if you fill out all these levers, that's 36 points. Now, that sounds like a lot, but that could potentially be, I don't know, like 15%, 10% of your score. So it's not actually that much, but it might be, it's a good boost. And actually, the final positions are about a 30-point difference. So actually, it worked well in Kirsty's favour. So
I found that quite interesting that I learnt that so early on in gameplay. And as I said, I think there's a lot from the semi-cooperative side of things. I'm really interested to have a few more games to see where it's going to go from. Yeah. So, I mean, I can see there's a really good game here. It's shining. It's just I need to dust off first, I think.
So I'm just going to challenge that semi-cooperative. Semi-cooperative suggests that we all want the same thing. We don't. No, I'm happy with the term, but actually, it's a lot of the time your decision making is sometimes based around what don't I want the other person to do?
Yes.
But you can't help but give them something. So it's an interesting balance. And certainly on this board, when you're putting pieces out, it really matters where you put them for benefit of all. So this is a really interesting board to play on. My good about this game is, first and foremost, this is a game for those of you who like heavier games that have got a lot of decision points constantly throughout the game. It's gonna hit people with AP quite badly at times, I suspect, because it's very hard to calculate out what the best decision is, because there are so many interesting decisions to take.
There's a lot of variables that can take place before you've even had chance.
Yeah.
Someone else can do a move, and it's like,
And because you're also doing something on everyone's turn, it starts to change the nature of what you're going to do on your turn.
Yeah.
And in a 3 or 4 player game, that we play 2 player, but in a 3 or 4 player game, that's going to be even worse, because the board state will have changed significantly by the time it gets back round to you. So the other thing for me, for those of you who've played Maracaibo, Maracaibo, the cash resource feels quite tight in Maracaibo, whereas here it feels very generous a lot of the time. You've almost always got cash to do what you need to do, and the main thing you're going to be doing with cash, in fact, I think the only thing you're going to be doing with cash is converting it into cards.
yes.
The cards are very familiar. They're very, very similar to Maracaibo cards. They all have a benefit. They all have a victory point total, or most of them have a victory point total. And they all have a cash resource and a goods resource. Now, the goods are often a permanent fixture on your board, so you get to a point in the game where you're not too worried about the goods. So from that respect, it's a very generous game. It gives a lot as you play, and that's quite nice. The action selection board, I think, is a really nice addition, as is the ability that you're giving an action to every other player on the board every time you take an action. Now, that might be that you're taking the action twice and the other players are taking it once, but it's still there, it's still available. The other resource that's quite tight are these inhabitants, the people, because you need them constantly, and you're constantly working out ways of recycling them, and that's quite a challenge as well. There's a lot of challenges going on in the game. So for me, the good is this is a heavyweight, thinky game, lots of great decision points, a really nice way of taking actions, and actually the entire game forces you to think about what you want to minimize your opposing players gaining from your actions.
Yes.
And I think that's interesting.
Also, another thing as well is it feels very Alexander Pfister in the respect that if you think about Maracaibo, you're going round
Great Western Trail, you follow the trail.
In Maracaibo, in Great Western Trail, you're going around. You've just put the trail in water.
Yeah, that might not quite.
Which I suppose is like Maracaibo.
Yeah,
it has that feel.
I know it does, and it's definitely a commonality to the timing mechanisms in Alexander Pfister games. So the end game is triggered by movement on the board. Great Western Trail. Yeah. I think Mombasa as well, although I can't remember. It's been a while since I played Mombasa, but certainly Great Western Trail, Maracaibo, and now Boonlake. So that expert level game that he produces, this seems to be his time mechanism of choice. I actually think I might like to see him diverge from that a little bit and do something a little bit different. Yeah. But it's familiar, and it's something you're used to in Pfister games. So that's like good. Let's move on to our bad. Kirsty.
Okay, so one of the things that I personally don't understand with the game, and obviously we do need to do more plays, is so on the title Boonlake and on the covering book and just on the boards here, I think there's probably going to be an image being shown now, there is this like microchip feel.
Yeah, it's definitely a electronics microchip. Yeah,
like electro vibe. Nothing else in the game has anything electronic. There's no use of electric. There's no electricity being used anywhere referenced. To me,
it doesn't even sit on the cards.
It's not on the cards. I don't understand where the electro vibe's coming from.
Yeah,
it's a bit. I don't know. It's just me. It's just something that doesn't quite sit right in it. There might be a story behind it. There might be a reason that I don't know. You know, we've read the rule book significantly. It's not mentioned. There is no. I don't know. For me, it feels a bit strange. We've obviously Phil's already mentioned the fact that coins are very heavily available, but unless you're just buying points, there is for example, where's the one? Where is it? Where you can buy victory point here? So on this square here,
pay 12 coins, 10 victory points.
Yeah, or 16 coins to buy victory points. Unless you're using your coins to do that, at the end of the game, it's a waste of time having coins.
Yeah, you need to
They're
empty your
not
coins.
worth anything. They're not. It's not like, oh, save 5 coins for Victory Point. There's none of that like in Western Trail.
No,
Like, there's no carryover. Coins are just a waste of space when it comes to Victory Points.
Yeah.
And that,
well, no, they're not, because the coins
well,
buy you the cards.
They do.
But I agree.
But
it feels
feels
strange to have a resource left at the end and you don't do anything with it.
It feels like something's just been slightly missed there, perhaps.
These vases are interesting because they allow you to buy more expensive cards, but we didn't see that many of these cards required either. So.
No, and actually, when you're going around the trail, you have a choice of vase or increase your resources.
And increase your resources.
Increasing your resources is so much more powerful because it gives you the ability to do these potential bonuses at the bottom, which you will probably have to need to explain at one point. Or, yeah. And I also have another bad about the game, but I feel that you may be talking about that as your ugly or bad, I'm not sure.
Okay.
And that is the player board.
You can talk about that, that's fine.
So the player board...
Do you want to use that one? Because, like, actually, there's only a couple of these tokens on there.
Yeah, it's probably easier to show. So the player board is actually, as you can see, not actually sticking together. The player board came as, obviously you need to pop out all the different sections. Those of you who already received the game will have found that. And then it comes with stickers, and the stickers are supposed to be holding the board together, which it will for a few moments, but then halfway through the game it will just pop up and it's not working properly. And when it's not working properly, when you've got these levers, which I had on my board, they slide, they get stuck underneath.
Yeah, you have to work them back out.
It's a minor niggle, and yes, it's something we can glue, but
will have to glue.
You have no choice but to glue it if you want the game.
Found it incredibly frustrating because actually it only seals here and here, not here, so you're still losing tokens and tiles.
Even if you'd done it the way round, that would have worked better to have had the levers here, so it's a tighter fit there, or include stickers to go there and there in the middle. Yeah. Yes, we will have to glue it. Yes, it's an easy fix. But in the same way, we had an issue with Lost Explorers. The box didn't work to play.
And that was the board.
That was the board. This is a board, and if you're using levers frequently, it's difficult to use them. Like as I was finding that the levers were getting stuck under
and to dig them out.
And it's an unnecessary faff when it's such a, like, literally that was the first game, and you think, you know, it's not the cheapest of games.
No, it's not.
A couple more extra stickers. Yes, we can do it, but you shouldn't have to. Not that early on. Yeah,
and actually, it's a nice idea because these basic boards fold out and they fold them together, so it's only 2 sticky dots. But actually, I'd much rather them just like having those 2 separate boards and glue them in the factory. It probably would have added a little bit of cost to the production, but it just would have finished the finish of the game. Production value on the game would have been so much tidier because everything else is really nice. And it's silly that a little thing like this actually diminishes the game.
And it seems silly, but actually it's when you're sliding these and you're using them. I mean, if you stood that back down, use that, oh, look, it's got stuck underneath now. And then when you're mid-play, you don't want to have to go, well, oh, hang on a minute, I've got to sort it all out. It's silly, but in gaming, it's annoying. Yeah. And that irritated me.
That was, so, my bads. Okay, so my bads... There's a couple. There's a couple of uglies as well, and I'll come on to the uglies in a moment. But first and foremost, the bads. By the end of the game, it kind of felt like we'd done everything, and the game was running out of steam, which is a bit of a shame. Now that might be, and probably is, the way we played the game because we took it quite steadily, so we'd get a feel for all the actions, so that we could explain the game to you in a bit more detail. And we tried to make sure we did everything, but actually we didn't race down the river particularly quickly. Often when we got a 3 or a 4 on the action track, we might have moved 1 or 2. So we didn't rush through the game. So maybe it's partly to do with how we played the game, but actually it kind of felt like it had petered out towards the end of the game. And I feel like the game probably needs to it needs to, and that's where I think this timing mechanism actually is failing in this game, because it's reliant on the players cooperating to move rapidly along it to keep the game at a reasonable pace. And I think that to me is just a bit of a shame. It's definitely, in my mind, it's bad. It didn't need the river as a timing mechanism. There could have been something else that pushed that timing mechanism. The rewards off the river are minimal at best and could have been replaced elsewhere. And it could have managed the game experience better. So I would just say, for me, one of the bads is this timing mechanism that flows through the game. Just for me, it's almost a motif for Alexander Pfister Games, but for me, in this particular game, it's not quite working. And then the other bad that I've got is this deck of cards. This deck of cards. So this is a 2-player game. This is our discard pile, and this is the remaining draw pile plus a stack of cards for both players. You have to buy those cards. Like they are where your points are coming from. Yeah. At the end of the game, those cards are worth 80 to 100 points, I would say. With maybe a bit less, but somewhere in that region. There's a big chunky of points coming from those cards. And if you haven't bought them often, so every turn, this idea of discarding for 2 coins, if you're doing that, you're desperate for coins. Yeah. Otherwise, you should be looking to buy a card. And there's certainly some elements of engine building in there that really trigger that. But I feel like it's not a decision, and that's my problem with it. That's why it's bad for me. So those 2 things are bad in my mind, because it's almost never a decision to buy a card on your turn. You want to buy a card, and the only time you don't buy a card is almost as an act of desperation. So that to me, I'm not quite sure about. And compared to the good, which is this action board and this cooperative board here, those 2 elements, the cards and the river as a timing mechanism, it's just a shame, because this could have been something different. The river could certainly have been something different, and it feels like you just need a slightly different, a more challenging choice on whether or not you buy a card. So they're my bads. Yeah,
because actually, if it was that, it could be purchase a card or do the action.
Yeah,
that would mix it up a bit.
Yeah, and it would put a much more challenging decision in your hands.
Yeah, and it would also mean that, for example, when Phil was just explaining then about the fact that we took it slowly down the river, we got to the stage where we were doing the 2 action tiles where you put action tiles.
Action tiles where you put tiles
where
out.
you put tiles out, where we were having to ignore this because we couldn't put any tiles out because there was no space.
Yeah,
and that was probably before we'd even hit here. So in the last run, we couldn't use those tiles for the first part. And that kind of felt, well, it's kind of, is the board not big enough? It made you have that feel about it.
Yeah, it was certainly partly due to the way we played the game. But at the same time, other players will play in that way. Yeah. And the game should satisfy all players.
It would have been play tested with someone just going, 1 jump, 1 jump, 1 jump. I mean, you can never, there is a point that no 2 boats can be on the same space.
So that
obviously that is 1 rather than being 1. So yeah, I don't know. It should have been play tested to be just 1, 1, 1, 1,
maybe.
1, and seeing if it still had the same effect.
Maybe. So they are good, they are bad. Have we got any uglies?
See, now for me, ugly, I'm not sure if it's too early for me to claim any
That's
uglies.
fine. And do you know what? I've got plenty.
Yeah.
Well, I've actually got 1, but it's a biggie.
Yeah. But yeah, I think it's too early for me to come up with anything that is ugly enough for me to say no to this game. I feel that a few more plays would be more beneficial for me. I do think at the moment you probably need to explain the bonus tiles because we still haven't done that.
Okay, these are bonus tiles. At the end of each interim scoring phase, you have to put one of these markers out, and you score the points on the marker, and you have to have achieved a certain target along the bottom. And they escalate as the game goes on. If you can't achieve one, you get negative points for it. But the negative points are so small in comparison to the points gained in the game. It's not that painful. And then at the top of those, the white half of the cards are special projects. So they're the same as the cards to buy. You're spending money and resources to purchase the cards. But they're just bigger and grander, and you probably want them, but they're not essential. You certainly want the one that your little ×2 multipliers on, because it doubles your victory point reward. Other than that, the victory points are thereabouts.
Yeah, it does give you the inhabitants, which are very difficult to get hold of during the game.
The inhabitants are a scarce resource.
Yeah, and it's a good way of spending money.
Yeah.
To be fair,
Towards
the end, I was doing that.
You can spend money on the inhabitants as well.
Yeah, you can. But actually, I found this was a good way of getting inhabitants towards the end of the game for me when I played.
Okay.
Just in case you need to know how to get them.
My ugly. It's probably the same ugly I have with Great Western Trail. It's the same ugly I have with Maracaibo, and it is now the same ugly I have with Boonlake. So this game is for 1 to 4 players. So there is a solo mode. There's an timer in the box, which is fantastic. 1 to 4 players, and it will take 40 minutes per player. Now, I don't know how good your maths is, but there are 2 of us, so that should be an 80-minute game. Now let's be realistic about that and add maybe half an hour as an initial learning game and play. So let's ignore the upfront teach, just look at the game time. So with that, 80 minutes plus maybe half an hour.
And we are experienced gamers.
We are experienced gamers.
We do know iconography of games.
Yeah, you get familiar with a lot of things, you get familiar with a lot of mechanisms, and I would say there's no real mechanisms in this game that are new to us as gamers. They're put together in new ways, which is lovely.
Yes.
So, depending on how good your maths is, at this stage, we're probably looking at 80 minutes plus 30, so that's 110 minutes. Yeah, so less than 2 hours. It took us nearly 4 hours to play our first game of this game.
Yeah,
4 hours. Now I know you're there. You're thinking, well, you're probably not that smart, and that's fair. You're welcome to your opinion. However, before we went to Essen, we played Coffee Traders.
Yes, we did.
And that, I would say, is a more complex game, just in the way it's put together.
Yeah.
Much more influence on what one player does can really swing the game in quite significant ways and change your strategy, your tactics on the fly. A lot more bound processes and bound mechanics in the game. So it makes it a lot more complicated, a lot more thinky than a lot of the time Boonlake is.
And it's got a thick rulebook as well.
And it's also got a thick rulebook, but that took us maybe 2.5 hours to play a full game of Coffee Traders and learn the game at the same time. Boonlake, no. Now this is my ugly, and it's massive frustration I have with Alexander Pfister Games, because ultimately, once you got to know the game, like I said, Great Western Trail sits in my top 5. Maracaibo is on its way up, and I have a very high expectation that Boonlake will head in that direction as well.
Yeah.
But the first time you play it, this thing here, this rule book, is hard work. It's really, really hard work. We played for just under 4 hours, and constantly referring to this, constantly, and it's a fairly consistent piece. And what that means, unfortunately, is a lot of players will have a first game experience of this game and go, no, it takes too long, it's too long-winded, too slow, not doing enough for me. It will, I think that 40-minute per player time will be about right. Once you're familiar with the game, you're familiar with the iconography, you know what all the actions do.
Yeah.
But it's going to take 4-5 plays to get to that point. And the worst part about it is, and this is why it's my ugly, it's not a bad thing in a way, it's just an ugly thing. The first play is going to be uncomfortable, it's going to be clumsy, it's going to be clunky, you're going to feel like it makes no sense what you're doing, you're just chasing points. It's really hard to put a strategy together, it's really hard to execute tactics during the game. And it's partly responsible because of how the rule book is put together.
You're flicking between pages so much to answer one question.
Yeah, there's like an iconography guide at the back. It doesn't have all the icons in it. Needs a bit of a player aid maybe. A player aid would have been fantastic. Now the argument there will be that the player aid is on the board. So when we're doing the interim scoring up here, we know that at the start of the interim scoring phase, we can either play a card or upgrade, and we can do that twice. We then put out our scoring tokens. We then score our little wheelbarrows for our income. We then reset our sliders, and
that's not being used.
and if we haven't used the slider, we get a victory point, and then we move these little black discs off the places they may have ended up. Don't worry about that. It's just one of the actions, and it's probably the simplest action in the game, although it has its own confusions. What it hasn't already said there is that during the interim scoring phase, and it's missing off there, is that you will score your cows based
that's exposed,
and anything that's exposed on your player board.
It doesn't say that.
Doesn't say that. For that, you need to go to the rule book, and you can say, well, just learn the rules better. But
this is a first, the
first couple of plays,
yeah,
you are going to be flicking through this. Once you know someone who knows the game well, yes, they're going to teach it better than the rule book can explain it.
Yeah.
They're also going to help you develop strategies, and they need to help you develop strategies when you're teaching this game, because actually you're not sure where your points are coming from early on, because it's not obvious. You're going to want to accelerate these tracks. Not always the best idea.
No.
Cards are really valuable resources, and once you get past sort of this fourth step on the card income, your card draw at the end, each interim scoring reduces. You probably want to keep that relatively high.
Yeah.
And the victory points here probably made an 8-point swing during our game.
Yeah.
How
we
valuable
both
is
got
that?
to the same, to be fair.
We did, but it would have made about an 8-point swing.
Yeah.
I don't know why these rule books are so difficult to get through, and it's disappointing to me, because actually it means that a lot of people are going to walk away from this game before they've got familiar enough with it to really enjoy what's available. And what is available is an incredibly good game of action selection, where you have to manage your opponent's involvement in your action, a shared board space, which actually is going to have you are going to be generously giving your opponents opportunities by where you place stuff, and that's going to frustrate you, but you're going to need to do it anyway. It's got a huge sort of intertwined sort of epic feel to the game. And I think if we play it a little bit faster in future, we'll not end up with that position where we feel like the game's running out of steam towards the end. But yeah, the biggest challenge for new players to come into this game, not new gamers, I want to be very clear here, not new gamers, but new players, the first time,
even experienced gamers,
first time they pick this up, it's going to be a very long play, and it's not going to feel nice, and it's going to mean people might not want to come back.
As long as you're prepared for that, and you're willing to play it maybe a couple of times on the bump so you can get used to it, then that's fine.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, my advice personally, I know we're talking about like ugliness, but my advice would be if you are going to play this game, play it in succession a couple of times.
Play 2 or 3 games in a row.
Familiarise yourself with the iconography, familiarise yourself with the actions, get your head around where the victory points are coming. Think about what cards were good on the first game, which ones didn't do very much. Think about the end game scoring. Think things through, learn from your first game, play a game, and then compare the two, because that's the best way to learn. And if you're teaching, the only advice I could give is run through the iconography first, then the actions, then the board, then this board last. And the reason being that once you've got someone understanding the icons, once you've got someone understanding what actions they are, they then understand how to take those actions
and how to interact with
the board.
Yeah,
and I think that is crucial.
It's not a bad idea, actually.
Not in that order would be much harder, because otherwise you're, well, what does this mean? How does that work? If you can do it in that order, I think you'll be onto a winner, would be my opinion. One thing I would like to say that's very positive about the box, just because obviously I haven't spent that much time looking at it, but sitting here with the beautiful lights on it, the box is stunning.
Yeah, it's a really nice box.
It's really, like, the artwork is beautiful.
It's a really nice box.
That artwork is, I mean, it's sort of on the back of the cards, but it's not reflected anywhere in the game. It's only the water, really. And this is the only beautiful flower in the game. They don't feature anywhere. Maybe 1 or 2.
No, they do. They're on the board just here in the harbours.
They're not, like, that could be a victory point sign.
It could have been instead of the skulls.
Yeah.
So, theme to one side, which is odd, and that's fine. It's kind of like post-industrial, post-apocalypse kind of vibe going on, but honestly, it's a Euro game through and through. The theme is optimistic at best, and at least has informed the artwork on the cards, maybe. You have here in Boonlake another great Alexander Pfister game, and I'm happy to say and call it a great Alexander Pfister game. And it might be...
Yeah, we don't doubt that.
It might even drift into my sort of top 5. Will it replace Great Western Trail? I don't know. But it has its problems, and its problems are largely due to a difficult first teach, a difficult first game, and a few uncomfortable, uncomfortable unnecessary things. Just a slip up in production quality, a river time mechanism that was probably unnecessary. But overall, if you like Alexander Pfister games and you don't mind the rule books, which talk to me because I'd like to understand why, and you are happy to get through the first couple of games, and I would say you probably want to play this game with the same people as well.
Yes.
Teaching this to new people is always going to be a challenge for that person. So I would say you very much want the group to bring your sort of group of 4 together regularly to play and bring this game to the table.
Or familiarise yourself with the game at the same time, so that it's an even play.
Yeah. Because
if someone's getting smashed every time,
they're not coming back for more.
They're not going.
So it is a great game. It is waiting to get out from under its own rule book is what it's trying to do.
Yeah.
And it will do. And when you're familiar with the rules, I already know, like at 3 and 4 players, I'm going to thoroughly enjoy this. Yeah. It's a 2-player count. It might be a bit tricky to manage the game, but actually, I think when the player count gets higher, it's going to be this shared workspace here is going to be fascinating, and the action tiles mean that the game state's constantly changing. Yeah. All of that interests me and excites me. If that interests you, this is a game you should go and pick up.
Definitely.
If that video has been in any way helpful,
yes,
please like and subscribe this channel. Yeah. We value your input and value your contribution.
Share this to anyone that you know has had Boonlake and yet hasn't opened it yet,
or is thinking about picking up Boonlake.
Yes, share it. Let them have the advice on what's the best way of teaching, because I think that is invaluable. We will be doing an example of setup on another video and shortly rules, as well, and rules, which will be a really in-depth, almost micro-teach, I suppose. Yeah. So don't miss out. Look out for that. We're also on Instagram, Twitter and Facebook, so just search Ludus Vulpes.
Thank you for your time today.
Thanks everyone. See you soon.
Bye.
Bye.